Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today for a webinar, Building on Data, Learning from the Best Buildings. We've got a star-studded panel to join us today. We are recording this webinar. Everything will be shared afterwards. So if you do have to leave early for any reason, or you want to share this with a colleague, you'll be able to. Today is a big day for HomeViews, not only to have the star-studded panel who I'll introduce you to in a moment, but it's also the launch of our new product, HomeViews Pro, which I'm going to talk a little bit about today, about how it can help inform every part of the process of designing a residential building, whether that be built to rent or built to sell. But we're joined today by an amazing panel who I'm going to ask to introduce themselves at the moment, all of which I'm very happy to say are HomeViews Pro users, and also in one case also a HomeViews partner with Matt at Allsop. But John, if I could ask you to introduce yourself first, that would be great.
Thanks, Rory. Hi, I'm John Batman from CallisonRTKL. I'm an architect, and as a firm, we've been involved in around 20,000 build-to-rent units across the UK, both master plan, architecture and interior design, and some 100,000 plus across the US in the multifamily market over there over the past 3 decades.
Great, thank you, John. Matt?
Thanks, Rory. I'm Matt Smith. I'm the CEO at Allsop. We work nationally across the UK with various multifamily and single-family clients, including the likes of Bearings, PGIM, Goldman Sachs, and a few others that I probably should mention but won't. So yeah, plenty of clients who are all operating in this space.
Thanks, Matt. And Ian?
Afternoon, everybody. I'm glad to be back sitting in this office because, as most of the other panelists will know, about 10 minutes ago I was out in the street with a pad because we had a fire alarm. I'm the Senior Director of Build-to-Rent Consultancy in Europe for Cortland. Cortland Consult is the business. In the US, we have nearly 90,000 apartments that we own and operate, about 19 billion invested. And in the UK, Cortland are currently building and buying up to about 5,000 units in the next sort of 3 or 4 years. I've been in build to rent for pretty much a decade now, and in that time probably worked on about 80 or 90 projects and several thousand, tens of thousands of units. So yeah, that's me.
Well, I think all of our joiners today can agree everyone on the panel is qualified. I might be the only pretender here, but I'm Rory Cramer. I'm CEO and co-founder of HomeViews. But in a previous life to HomeViews, I was actually head of consultancy at CBRE and very much worked on the very upstream parts of designing buildings, specifying buildings. And so today's panel is really exciting because it's a chance for us to show how data is informing the design and delivery of residential buildings in the UK, particularly build to rent, and how HomeViews has become a central part of that through the data that we collect, but also through HomeViews Pro. So what is HomeViews Pro? Just a very quick introduction, and then I promise I'll stop with the sales pitch, but I think it's really important to understand why we've been able to create this new product. So HomeViews has been going for 4 years now. And we never started HomeViews with a view that we would become a data and insights business. But what became very clear throughout our life cycle is the data we were collecting, the reviews, the statistics, was the only source of data of its kind, cross-sector, across thousands of units, thousands of verified residents, across build to rent, build to sell, shared owners in every part of the country. And we very quickly realized that while our core business model was working with developers and operators and HAs who have residents, there was a huge demand and value to this data for everyone that works in the residential ecosystem. I hate that word ecosystem, but it's the best way to describe it. And just as a reminder, HomeViews, we have a website, obviously consumer website, 2.5 million people a year, unique visitors a year now visit the HomeViews website to help them do their research on a building, on a brand that they're thinking of renting or buying from. We have partnerships with over 50 of the largest residential brands in the UK, including L&Q, Lovell Homes, Get Living, Greystar, who use us as a brand management tool, as a marketing tool, and also a customer insights tool. And I suppose the last part of this jigsaw is that we're now a data and insights provider to the wider sector. And we launched Pro as a pilot about 6 months ago now, of which I'm very proud to say that Callison, Allsop, and Cortland were 3 of the 10 brands that included companies like JLL, Knight Frank, that we work with to help refine how you would use this data and actually get the most of it to make sure that we are building the best possible buildings relevant to the target market. Just as a reminder, each one of HomeView's reviews is full of data points. And I think that, we always came to the review from the consumer's perspective. We wanted to give the consumer the best possible insights as to what it's like to live in this location, in this building. So on every development page on HomeViews, you'll see the same data that we share live: facilities ratings, design ratings, location ratings, value ratings, management ratings, overall star ratings, ranking in a local area. There's a huge amount of nuggets as well of information within the qualitative data. We ask what you like and dislike about the area. Please share one thing or more you wish you'd known before you'd moved in. How has the building management responded to any problems or issues you've raised? When you start overlaying that qualitative data and quantitative data, you can come out with some incredible insights, either at a micro level, building by building, or looking at regional trends within a sector. And we do collect some additional data that you don't see on the website. So around sustainability, we ask all residents if sustainability is important to them, and then we ask them to select a feature of their home that is most important. And we also ask how old they are. Now, Pro gives you access to all of this data, and it allows you to compare and contrast and overlay multiple data points to really zero in on what it is you're looking to understand. And this is the largest database of its kind. So at the last count, although it's increasing day by day, we were at nearly 37,000 reviews, just over 36,000 resident reviews. And remember, we verify when a resident lives in the building. So we do a KYC check. We take a full name, postcode, flat or house number, and we run an automated ID check. So the reviews we collect are very detailed, and they're validated as well. What Pro allows you to do is, whoever you are, and by the way, I was looking at the attendee list that we have today. We have a complete cross-section of the industry. We have architects, we have investors, we have developers who are pre-residents, we have suppliers, we have planners. And I think that there are multiple different use cases for this data. Hopefully we'll highlight some of those today with our panel. But in a nutshell, Pros gives you access to 36,000 reviews across thousands of developments. We have over 90% coverage within the build-to-rent sector of completed build-to-rent stock. I think at last count, well over 80% of all single-family housing stock. We've also ingested new data. So we've researched all asking price rents for completed build-to-rent buildings that we have reviews on. We've also detailed exactly what facilities are advertised within those buildings. It allows you to create benchmarks and look at average benchmarks for build to rent, for build to sell, for owners, for private tenants. So it's not just looking at data, it's actually being able to look at, where specific buildings sit, where specific brands sit, how regions compare against the wider UK. And I think that context point is really key, because a lot of brands and a lot of particularly developers, but also brands who work in residential, have been doing internal surveys, but it never provided that context to the wider market. And the last part of Pro is that you also receive every month an exclusive piece of content. And the first bit of content is the extended build to rent report, which is going to be available throughout May for all of our HomeViews Pro partners, which includes a huge amount of data, which I'm about to give you a sneak peek of today. So just a few screenshots from the new platform, which my product team, a big shout out to them, have been working tirelessly over the last 6 months to develop. Here, this is an example of where you can build a completely unique portfolio of any development we have reviews on HomeViews. Start comparing how they how they score against each other by overall ratings, facilities ratings, design ratings, value ratings. So if you are an architect or if you are an investor and you haven't had that resident feedback loop and you have a portfolio that spans multiple brands or multiple operators, you can create your own portfolio on HomeViews and really see how those buildings stack up against each other and the wider market and benchmark them. You can also then compare, okay, which are the top rated buildings for facilities, what facilities do those buildings actually have, and what asking price rents are they asking for. So you can really start overlaying and understanding what premium is maybe being asked for in relation to facilities, and really getting under the skin of what's on offer within these buildings. And we also have a very cool sort of comparison map, which would allow you to look by region at the data by any resident type, by any sector. So if you just wanted to look at build to rent, or you wanted to look at build to rent and build to sell buildings, but just private tenants, what are the top rated buildings in those regions and brands for any of the ratings we collect: facilities, design, location, value, management. And then really drill in. Even one of the things we were looking at the other day is what are the top rated regions for value, and that could be for owners or for build to rent tenants, to really understand some of the macro data that the HomeViews database allows you to look at. So I suppose what I'm trying to get across is you can be as detailed as you want, or you can really be looking at trends at a regional level and comparing different regions if you're operating in different areas. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. We collect demographic data as well. So you're able to look at the resident experience by demographic. So to the younger residents score higher for certain features within specific buildings or in regions. But also this just gives you a snapshot of how old the residents are in build to rent in East London. We can give you a snapshot of that, or in a more specific location, or in a portfolio, or in comparison to multiple developments. And I think that, you know, when I used to spend my life doing comparable reports that my directors at CBRE would always take the credit for. But I think this sort of information, when you're trying to figure out the target market, really understand what are the top performing assets, what are the trends of the residents within a certain area, this demographics tool is really enlightening. And then we also ask about sustainability. And one of the questions that we ask is sustainability important to you? And actually looking at how the answer to that question changes by age, by region, by building type is fascinating. And I know that Matt has a case in point where actually we then ask the residents what features of their home are most important to them. And so you're able to see within a certain demographic, in a certain building type, in a certain area, what are people saying about sustainability? How can you plan that in to what your building delivers? Or what do you think you might be underselling from either a marketing perspective or even putting into your planning application? So it's very difficult to include every use case for Pro on this short webinar. I don't want to bore you all with it, but frankly, whoever you are, whether you're an investor, whether you're an operator, whether you're an architect, whether you're a supplier, there was a really interesting use case for you on HomeViews. Now, one of the this is a page from our extended build to rent report. And one of the other pieces of data we're ingesting is the total number of units within all build to rent developments and also completion dates. But what this allowed us to do is to look at the top rated buildings and how big they are for each of the different category ratings we have, to identify what the sweet spot was for in terms of scale for the resident perspective, in terms of facilities ratings, design ratings. And what we found is, at a high level, based on the data that report was done on, that it was a 300 to 400 unit mark, which I did have a question thrown back at me by Andrew Pratt. He was like, why don't you ask the investors what their risk profile is instead of just asking the residents? But I thought this was really interesting because clearly it aligns to the fact that when you deliver a larger building, you can also often deliver more amenity. But as we'll touch on with Matt, it's not all about the bells and whistles from a facility perspective when it comes to facilities scores. There's more to it than that, which Matt will allude to in a minute. And another example, and this again was in the extended build to rent report, one thing we're very keen on at HomeViews is helping to educate local authorities and government at a central level and a local level on what build to rent is and what build to rent can provide their local community. Now, this graph just compares the resident experience in Tower Hamlet, and it shows that build to rent residents in Tower Hamlets have a much better experience through every single data point that we collect than in build to sell. So whether it's an owner in build to sell or a private tenant in build to sell, and I think just at a very headline level, when you're going into an early planning discussion with the local authority, to be able to say, look, build to rent is providing a brilliant resident experience across every metric. One of the challenges we hear people are facing in various places around the country is, build to rent is maybe viewed as a hotel and a short-term stay. And actually what all of our data shows is that is not the case. And I think just using Pro and using the data we have to help just align that sort of first discussion from a planning perspective can be very, very powerful. That's enough from me on some specific examples. I think back to our panel, and John, by the way, just for everyone's benefit, if you are interested in HomeViews Pro, we'll be sending a follow-up with a recording of the webinar where you can book in time to have a chat with us and find out more, or just email me or one of my team directly if that's easier. But John, I'd like to come to you first, if that's okay. I suppose in the chronology of designing and planning for a large residential project, you're right up at the coalface. I know that Ian and Matt are also involved at very, very early stages. But as an architect, how important is data in the first steps of when you come to think about who lives in a building, who you're going to make it appeal to, and how do you go about that process? How does it start off for you?
Thanks, Rory. It's amazing seeing the platform presented like that as well. Congratulations. It looks, we're looking forward to getting stuck into it. And it's been good fun helping craft it a little bit over the last few months as well. I think what's really telling is that we're kind of on the build to rent 2.0 now, aren't we? We're, back in 2010 when I started in this sector, it was, we were all flapping around a little bit and thinking about what we put in things. I remember someone saying to me, well, if it's got a dumbbell apartment and a gym in it, it's build to rent, isn't it? And how far the market has come since those days. The way we're really thinking about it, and we've kind of brought this from our work in the US and other places around the world, where we've always defined build to rent as what you're trying to do is create a community of like-minded residents that you're designing it for operations, and it's going to deliver a great customer service. And whatever the scale of it, wherever it is in the world, if we're able to do that, it's going to be a success. So we use the data quite a lot to begin to dive into really what that lifestyle looks like for those residents, and to get a deep understanding from the outset of what your favorite word, ecosystem, is like in the town or the city that we're designing. So we kind of come at it very much from a people first point of view, and begin to look in depth at where those people are working, what they're earning, what type of shops they're shopping in, how they're socializing, how they're exercising, how they might move around the city, etc. And then begin to kind of take that research and begin to pull it all together into personas and create tribes from that persona, and then develop the product out of that. And what that means is that you're getting a really in-depth understanding of the place and the people that you're designing for. What we've got now, thanks to you and the team at HomeViews, is data points now that we can begin to think about that customer service part of that saying I mentioned earlier, that there's what are people valuing, what will people pay for, what will people expect in that town and that city, and how are they beginning to define value, and what makes it a differential. And I think that's the nub of it really, is that everything's changing so rapidly. We often talk about the home as kind of the anchor at either end of the day of your lifestyle, and that they're shopping in different ways, working from anywhere. You've got restaurants without tables that are just sending Deliveroo to the door of your property. You know, you're renting wardrobes now. It's all changing so rapidly that we want insights that are, you know, available very rapidly based on the people that are living there when we're designing things which might not get built for 3 years.
Absolutely. I think just to pick up on your point about value, and one of the things I found fascinating looking at the data that obviously you can do with the new asking price data is actually look at the perception of value. So do people feel like they're getting value for money? Because that's the score we collect on HomeViews, and how that correlates with asking price. And actually some of the most expensive build to rent buildings in the UK are also perceived to be the best value because they are providing fantastic customer service, amazing facilities, and they're also creating that perception of free. It's something we identified last year. And Matt, you'll be really familiar with this, you know, the events, the coffee, just the curation of that community. And I suppose designing in the ability for the operations tool to provide that level of service is really key for you to identify, John. Ian, on the consultancy side, I know that you are very hungry for data and have always been looking for, you know, different data sources, whether that be from, you know, demographics, but also what people are looking for. How do you find that data has kind of woven itself into your process over the last few years?
Well, if I go back to the beginning of the PRS evolution, you know, that 10 years ago was really kind of emerging, and we were all looking across to the States for, you know, how is the multifamily market, you know, developed, and, you know, what information and data can we bring across and consume to inform what we're doing here. And I think, you know, we ran into speed bumps quite a lot because, you know, there just wasn't enough data available for us to kind of probably call it an informed decision. So, you know, we did the best that we could with all the available information. And, you know, in those, you know, a few years ago, our data sources were so numerate in terms of the number that we had to trawl that it was a lot of effort to, you know, to find the data that was useful. And when you found the data, you had to do a lot of interpretation of it, that, you know, actually, were you interpreting it in the correct way? So, you know, as you know, I've been a ESG, all the lights are going on and off like a, as you know, I've been a fan of HomeViews a long time because, you know, there is nothing better than actually asking the people who are going to live in your buildings, what do you think of your buildings? It's been a long career of mine where, you know, when I was doing schools and hospitals and healthcare projects, it was always about asking, you know, what do you need and what do you want? So it's been extremely useful to be able to consume data from real reviews. And, you know, I think we place a lot of currency in, you know, the data that we pull from HomeViews, and the depth of data that we're able to pull from HomeViews is just growing and growing. And obviously Pro is, you know, and the antithesis of what we want to consume. We have to weave it in to other data sources, and we still have to find data from different locations. And then the interpretation of the data is obviously one of the key parts, because at the end of the day, you can put a lot of data down, but if you actually haven't got the experience and the knowledge to pull that data into some kind of, you know, coherent, you know, brief for your design team. And, you know, I would say, I mean, we almost feel that actually we come in front of architects and help architects and understand what we really want out of the building, because we've got knowledge of the demographic, you know, and we've got knowledge of the market and who's renting and what they're looking for. So it's been, you know, a long journey of data, you know, being collated into more consumable, you know, forms. And in fact, I think actually, you know, the work that you and ourselves and Realize did with UKA and mapping that data onto a map, and currently we're adding London to that at the moment. You know, that's extremely useful to visualize how that data comes forward as well. And then just to sort of top and tail it, the thing that really has pushed it again to another level is ESG. So I've been banging on about life cycle for far too long. I'm a life cycle bore. But ESG has all of a sudden really kind of brought to the fore what we need to think about in the future. So, I mean, we are all gazing into the future about what kind of buildings we're designing for people to live in and how they're going to live in them, and then how much energy we're going to consume and what we, so all that data just allows us to be more informed about the product that we're putting down. And I think, I would argue the evolution of build to rent now is we're up to level 3.5 or something like that, 3.5 as opposed to 2.0. I mean, I think, we've got many versions of it to look back on, and today is the best version that we can possibly do, but tomorrow's will be better.
Thanks, Ian. And so I think the takeout for me on what both of you are mentioning is that there's the ability to look at our data at a sort of macro perspective and identify trends and see best in class. But I think where it also really comes into its own is looking at specific examples. And so Matt, from an operational perspective for you, you've got firsthand experience of, taking on buildings within their life cycle, taking on buildings that have different design challenges, if you can call office to resi design challenges. Actually, our data shows that really well done office to resi conversions in built to rent are super highly rated, and the Keel is a building of yours that you manage, which was right at the very top of that group. In terms of data, using data from an operational perspective, can you give us a few ideas of how you use that and some examples of where you've kind of seen that validation of a decision? And one of the things I know you guys also do is consultancy pre-operations, and all of us are probably being, well, I'm not thankfully anymore, but being pulled into VE discussions right now.
Yeah.
What can you get rid of to save costs? And I think that's a real drawing a line to say, no, this is the minimum to get what you want. It's very useful. Have you had any experience of that in the past or currently?
Yeah, obviously we suppose from an operational perspective, we tend to fall into two camps. We'll help with the design piece. We'll work with architects like John on different schemes. We've had schemes come across our desk that Ian's worked on as well. So it's you can often see when somebody's had hold of a scheme that really understands how it's going to end up operating, which is ultimately what you want as an operator, because otherwise you can be living with mistakes because people are just doing things how they've always done them, which is it's not ideal or not optimal, shall I say. And I think, as you say, sort of an office to resi conversion, the Keel was a very early iteration. It's probably, if we're going on a 0 to 3.5 scale, we're probably at 1.0 of the Keel. And it had a number of advantages, I suppose, in so much as because it was an office to resi conversion, there was a degree of flexibility of the space when we took over management a couple of years ago. So we've been able to sort of take it from a site that was fairly sort of basic in terms of sort of lobby amenity. It's more like a waiting zone, and we've been able to turn that into a co-working space. So it's an area for residents to come down, and they'll use it during the day as a place to work and then in the evening to socialise. And I think that flexibility of design is really important. When we look at the sort of the HomeViews scores, it's what's interesting, as you sort of talked about value before, we're seeing value from 2021 moving into 2022, probably going up by half a point there on a 5-point scale. So it's quite significant that. But then overall sort of customer satisfaction is also going up. So it's value and it's customer satisfaction, and all the time we're in a rising market where rents are being pushed as well. So it's ultimately this stuff comes back to, if your customer's happy, your scheme's probably going to be doing quite well financially as well. So that's on a sort of a larger scale, sort of project-driven basis, which requires quite a bit of sort of capital investment. But then there's sort of those marginal gains that you'll see very early, where if you're getting a HomeViews submissions coming in from customers saying, actually, we'd quite like you to have access control on the lift. That's the sort of thing that will quite often get feed out of a design. And we've had schemes where we've had a couple of reviews in. The reviews haven't been negative, but they've referred to this improvement that they'd like to see. And that gives you an opportunity to tell your customer that we're listening to you. We've made this change. And actually, if you communicate it in the right way, you're much more likely to start to see those positive reviews coming through. So it's an amazing customer engagement tool. It's fantastic, and it's, you know, I think it's one of the reasons why our schemes are successful, is because we do try to embed that culture of listening to your customer.
I think that's so. Sorry, and I was just going to say, I think that's so true. Reacting on the data as it comes in, but also seeing. There was a great example in East Village of residents complaining about the local council's glass collection policy, which was kind of non-existent, and within about 3 or 4 weeks, Get Living and introduced a, you know, privately run glass collection. It had a huge impact because it showed that they were listening, but also it sings to that sort of ESG agenda as well. Sorry, Ian, I cut you off.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, you know, I think it's testament to Matt and the team, you know, that they've managed to get such high scores at the Keel, you know, which I think we're all agreeing is a 1.0 building as opposed to a 3.5 building. Now, you know.
Have we lost Ian? I think you're on mute, Ian.
Oh, sorry, it went to mute. Yeah, I just was saying that, you know, the Keel, it is testament to Matt and his team that they've got that a high score. I mean, the current scores are 4.89 or whatever it is. That's really right up there. You know, now you give Matt a 3.5 level building, and, you know, I don't know how you go beyond 5, but you're definitely going to have happier customers because there's just more that, you know, available to them. And I think it's just, you know, it's something that we need to reflect and remember on, is that no matter what we do in the design side of things, and no matter what we do in the, you know, in putting a building together, it really will come down to the management and the operations and how people are looked after and cared for. And, you know, the HomeViews reviews give us a very clear view of what people think of things. And, you know, it's extremely useful to look ahead with those pieces of data. I mean, I'm looking at the top 20 that we pulled off today from HomeViews Pro. And, you know, the scores go from 4.89 to a full 5 on the top 20, but across, you know, facilities, location, value, design, and management, we can see different and fluctuating scores. And actually, it's extremely useful to pick out, well, what elements are scoring high in the physical sense so that we can replicate those and put those into buildings. But at the same time, what's happening on a management sense, and why are people happy? And we have to reflect that in the management. So it's a marriage between those two things that's really useful. And HomeViews is pretty unique in that it marries that physical and, you know, non-tangible service side of things together, which is, you know, the nirvana of data for us, really, you know.
I think Rory, you used the word validate before, Rory. That's a really good way to, you know, validating decisions through a process when you're spending multi-millions of pounds on a building, and all you're trying to do is get to day one, even though you are having a group of people involved who are thinking about year 25. So when you're having to validate that access control, that recycling strategy, that, you know, you're able to put in resilience into the building, that you can begin to think, well, if it does change slightly, we do need to bring that in. Perhaps we do VE it now, but we can bring it back in later. You know, I think the building needs to begin to be thought of a bit more as this evolving entity a little bit that can change as over time, as the product evolves, as trends change, you know, a little bit, but also as feedback becomes more relevant to that building and that location. I mean, I've always talked quite excitedly about competition. I love it when competition comes in around our buildings, our clients' buildings, because you know, everyone wants the best. You know, everyone's vying then for the best products, and therefore you've got to be, if you're first out the blocks on a new part of town or whatever, or a new city, then you're going to have to be good enough because the pack is going to be behind you and delivering other buildings, and that resilience has got to be there. So validating decisions, it's a super tool to think about making those decisions with.
I think the way I summed it up is, as a consultant, you know, I had been giving my opinion based on the buildings I'd worked on for a long time, which I made a career out of it, so it must have had some form of impact. But I hope that this really helps with validating that decision, but it also can really drill into the specific details. And I've got a list when we had the preamble. And by the way, just to let all the listeners know, if you would like to ask any questions, please do. You can submit your questions. I don't think we've had any come in yet. If we haven't covered something you're particularly interested in, please do ask and we'll try and get to it. But one of the examples, John, you brought up was looking at facilities and the facilities. Now, I think that we've all alluded to this, but and I think the trilogy is a great example of this, Matt, which is where you don't, in a lot of cases, you don't have to have all of the bells and whistles when it comes to facilities in the building to be really highly rated for facilities. Actually, HomeViews data shows the four things that the top rated buildings for facilities have, built to rent buildings have on HomeViews, are being pet friendly, front of house staff, a gym, and I've forgotten the last one, which is not ideal, but there was a fourth. It will come back to me. But and I'm not saying at all that in the right market that the other facilities, whether it be a pool or whether it be a cinema room, don't have an impact. But I think what that kind of showed on a baseline is if the management is really good, if you're making the most out of the facilities you have, if you're creating community and delivering those intangibles, which is experience that people haven't had renting in a new home for a private landlord, that will have a huge impact. But John, you did say something really interesting, which was when you have a multi-phase development, potentially with multiple different cores and different buildings within a scheme, the fact that often there's a habit of pepper potting amenity, and actually Ian and Matt, we were talking about this in terms of getting amenity onto a top floor. But what John raised is they were able to see on one of his clients' buildings in Manchester that is super highly rated, affinity living, but actually one of the buildings that didn't integrate have the facilities, even though all the residents have the benefit of that building that was next door to the building with facilities had a lower rating. And it's on the app, they can book the room, they can walk across the street, and I think it's just those those little intangibles. It's difficult to know where it lands with the resident. We're beginning to see that coming through in the data.
But there is an additional layer that you need to add to that, though, Rory, is that we're in a very rapidly expanding market. We're still at it's nascent. If you listen to Brendan Geraghty at the UK, he calls it nascent, and he's right. We are still a tiny fraction of the overall rental market. As we produce more product, the competition in the actual physical product will increase, and the product that doesn't have as much of the physical amenity, built into it or baked into it, will trail a little bit in the future because it will struggle to compete with something that's got more amenity and more physical things. So, while we're in a really growth phase, I think we can get away with a little bit of product that doesn't quite have, what the 3.5 would build and design, but we need to be looking at the future. And the next 10 years, we need to be building 4.40 and 4.5,
I think this is it's one of those points where I can agree with everybody here. Because if you're looking at Trilogy, Trilogy's won BTR Scheme of the Year twice in a 4-year period. And the most recent win, that pleases the most because because by that point it's an older scheme. It's competing in Manchester. The market there understands what build to rent is. I still think the majority of our tenants are probably coming from older style PRS stock, but we are competing against other schemes now, so you're getting that critical mass. I think Trilogy, one thing that does play in its favour is that there's 3 cores there and they're all linked by the same amenity space. So it's easy for getting that customer engagement community piece that feeds through. But to Ian's point, we will have to be alive to what the next iteration of build to rent is. And part of our role as operator asset manager is to make those advisory actions to our clients so that they can invest and make sure that asset stands the test of time, really.
We have schemes where we've got, we're putting units in which we know are going to come out in 5 years' time, and we need to add to that amenity or other change like that. The one that we're always referring to is down at Embankment West, where one of the buildings, Lawrence Place, has ground floor, very active, like coffee shop in there, big co-work area, really funky open plan entrance there, and the building next door, which is run by the same people, has much less of that. It just has a bit more functionality about it, but they're all part of it. But it's interesting to see you know, that is literally, it's the same building, it's the same brand, it's on the same site, it's off the same square, it's 50 yards from each other. But the resident reviews have thankfully been done different by building, and it shows that those on the amenitized one want to be in it, and those that are in the or the one where the amenity isn't as great are saying, oh, I'd like some more of that in my building. And it's like, well, you can move next door. But so it's interesting to see where we've got other schemes, you know, Station Hill in Reading, where we've really been, you know, there's a whole amenity strategy around that, which is about some up high, some down low, some street level, some tucked around the back, some private, some in the sun, some in the shade. You know, we've really thought deeply about what the composite of amenity is going to be at the end. And I think some of the feedback that you get from other schemes, from some of those home views, really gives you really interesting points of view of what people will pay for and what they want in those buildings.
We've had an interesting question, which I want to throw at Ian, from Erin Hunter. Thank you, Erin. I'd love to hear more from Ian around ESG. What are the key bits of data built-to-rent providers need to be collecting, and what would how would they use it? I guess. What's your view on this?
Well, I know I'm going to be seeing Erin at the Corporate Real Estate Tech Conference tomorrow, so I think she's asking that question very specifically. I mean, ESG, I think if we're really honest about it, the responsibility at the moment is really going to fall mostly on the owners and the operators. The residents themselves are not driving a huge quantity of ESG responses. We are facilitating it and giving them the opportunity to be more environmentally conscious about the way that they occupy the building. And, there is a lot of technology out there. The guys at Utopia have a sensor that gives you multiple readings. Now, it's 7 different readings that it gives you, including humidity and CO2 and this, that, and the next thing. But most of the operational use of that is that, well, if the apartment isn't occupied, then we need to do a flushing. So there's a limited amount of response that can come from that. I mean, at the end of the day, if somebody's paying their own heating bills, there's not much that we can say to them about turning it down and becoming, using less of it. It's a bit like the hotel room. You always leave the key in the thing and put the air conditioning on so it's cool when you come back. We're all guilty of that kind of behavior. So I think, what I am seeing is a much greater response now from the institutional investors and the operators who are really trying to look ahead and think, right, how can we make net zero buildings, both from a construction and building perspective, but also from an operational perspective. And that ain't going away in a hurry. In fact, I would say that's accelerating at a great pace at the moment.
I think I'd like to kind of add to that. I suppose ESG, as well as all of the environmental aspects of it, there's obviously the S is the social aspect of it. And I think that, I've recently been speaking to the CMA, the Consumer Market Authority, about they're doing a report on the experience of tenants in the UK, and I think build to rent is forming a big part of that discussion point now. But having a feedback loop is kind of the starting point, right? Providing a level of transparency, being seen to listen to your residents, and also tracking that over time. And you talk about institutional investors in, I think that, being able to show your the energy performance of your building, the sustainability performance of your building, but also to show that you've been listening throughout a building's life cycle. One of the things we've been, Matt, you touched on this, is, some of the buildings that we've got reviews on now are quite a few years old within their operational life cycle. And we're not seeing that experience dip. If anything, in a lot of cases where they've been really well managed, it's growing, because the creation of community, people have been living there now for 2 or 3 or 4 years. So I think that there's Utopia is a great example of the tech that's coming in to be able to help you measure that environmental side. But then I also think it's proving that you're also sowing that sort of social thread through your portfolio and your future buildings is key as well. Sorry, was someone about to say something? You've had another...
Yeah, I was going to say, Rory, I think our experience customers on site, they'll feedback. For instance, we've had it at Box where I think we already had 4 waste streams, and they're pushing for more. I think it was 73% of respondents said they wanted to see more recycling available at site. And that's sometimes manifested itself as closed recycling points or they want to be involved with, tree planting or whatever it is. But it's that, quite often we're finding our corporate clients or institutional clients are happy to fund this through their budget, because it takes a number of ESG credentials for those guys as well. So we're actually starting to get to this pleasant sort of space where customer and landlord, or customer and client, are actually aligned on this stuff. They all want it, for very good reason. So
I think that's a really, really good point. Yeah.
And the data validation, as John says, it's there. You can see it. It's, so it enables you again to be seen to be listening to your customer.
I was with Long Harbour a couple of weeks ago, and I was able to show them on Pro that their the percentage of their residents that care about sustainability and the features of their homes they care most about, and the fact that recycling was actually way ahead of average on a couple of their schemes in North London. And the first question was, well, what are we doing on recycling? What is are we doing the standard? What would happen if we pushed it, if we had the best recycling process of any building within that area? Would that potentially mean that your lease up rates will be higher in the future, because you can really push yourself as the recycling minded building? And little things like this, I suppose, little practical things that you can, when you listen to your residents, you can implement. John, there's a question for you, or there's a few that have popped in, so let's try and field these in order. Martin Greenland, question for John: how are architects using data to inform changes in terms of design and build to rent? It's quite a broad question, but do you want to have a go at that?
The first bit of data that we had when we were beginning on the build to rent journey was from a client of ours, UDR, in the US, that had about 150,000 units, and theirs was, and this has been a long told stat, which was 50% of residents would renew their lease if they knew one person in the building, and 90% of their residents would renew their lease if they knew two or more people. So that was a piece of data which suddenly enabled everyone to understand that creating community and spaces where people could make friends, etc., was not just a nice to have. Wouldn't it be good if, wouldn't we be wonderful providers of homes if we did that? It's becoming a commercial decision, right? The leases are there's less voids, there's less operational costs if you can keep people in the buildings. And I think that's the first bit of data we began to use and mull over. And now we're at a point where we have lots of computational design tools and parametric tools which help us design the buildings to be the most orientated in the best way. And I call it the Lego program, where we can put the Lego blocks inside the volume, and it moves them all around until it's in the most optimum place to get the most views of the landscape, or of the most close, put the closest number of people to the amenity, etc. And we can use lots of data for that. What I'm quite interested in is how we're going to use the consumer data and the feedback data that you're gathering for this to, in a parametric way. How can we begin to feel that we've got tools which we can use when we're designing buildings, which we can say, yes, that is going to deserve a best customer service? And I'll take, Ian and Matt's point is all, I completely take this on board, that, the design is kind of done when we've drawn it, and before it's even in the ground, it's up to the operators and the teams operating these buildings to make sure the customer service is as good as it can be. But the data needs to inform the design enough to give them the very best chance to create the very best building and the very best customer service within those buildings.
I think all I'd add to that for Martin is we have multiple use cases of when, particularly in VE discussions, but in the design proposal discussions, validating a decision for an amenity, a particular amenity or a feature or a layout of a flat, can be validated by looking at the best-in-class examples that do utilize that. And in fact, people talk about it frequently, and that's one of the features of Pro, is that you're able to look at how frequently certain features of a building are mentioned, positively or negatively, and really correlate that to the design decisions you're implementing moving forward.
Everyone can understand a very defined metric like cost, right? So a balcony costs this. We always ask, how much is the balcony going to make in value? And it's like, now we're beginning to get data that people want that stuff. So, that's where it's less binary than a cost conversation, but it's much more rich and long term in how it's going to benefit the building as a whole.
I think that's an incredibly key point. That is that, you know, traditionally when we were producing and procuring residential projects, they were capital projects, and once the capital was spent, it was over.
Yeah.
These are not capital projects; these are revenue projects. And actually, you know, the validation of the VE question, where somebody says, "Look, can we take out the multimedia room that, you know, you might call it a cinema room or whatever it is?" And you go, "Well, we have real evidence that people want this and will use it." And actually it supports the rental projections that we've got. And by the way, you know, a balcony, you know, might cost you £500 to put on the side of the building, but will earn you, you know, £25,000 in GDV per annum in rental income. All of a sudden, those two things are, you know, correlate very quickly. And, you know, I think that it's extremely helpful to have the data now to go back to a design team or a cost consultant or a client and say, don't make this decision. It's a bad decision. It will affect your revenue, you know.
I think just for everyone who joined later, as part of HomeViews Pro, we are ingesting and researching all asking prices for build to rent buildings in the UK that we have reviews on. So you can correlate the resident experience by asking price for 1, 2, and 3, and really explain that there is that premium available if you do, you know, design in that certain feature. Question from Richard Dorr. I note that the latest HomeView report, converted office to resi built to rent developments score very highly. Do you think this is due to residents really appreciating the carbon positives of this type of product, or can you suggest this is due to other values? Well, just
no.
I was going to say, so Richard, one of the questions we ask is sustainability important to you, and then residents pick the features of their home that are most important to them. If you look at that data for the office to resi buildings that we collect, you can see that very few people have any idea about the carbon positives of an office to resi. And one of the big things actually we're looking at championing through HomeViews Pro, but also our sustainability report, is this should be marketed. It should form part of the way a building is marketed to the consumer, and there isn't enough education for the consumer.
Well, that is definitely coming down the track, Rory, because we've got a massive project in Glasgow, which is an existing office building, and the amount of work that we've done on the embedded carbon of the current structure versus what's going to be replaced by the new structure. Now, anybody living in the new structure isn't going to have any clue about this carbon calculation work that we've done. However, we've done it in such a way, and we've, you know, what we're proving is actually, you know, we're making a carbon positive effect by doing this building and procuring this building in a certain way and building it in a certain way. And, you know, that's just incumbent upon us as an industry to make sure that we're doing that. People in the future will come to expect that their buildings are net zero and carbon neutral, because that's going to become the standard that, you know, people will just think that's how it's going to be. So, but they don't ask. I mean, they're not coming into new buildings and saying, what's the carbon footprint of this?
They're more concerned with, this is where that alignment's needed. So the customer wants to know how much it's going to cost them to live there. So it's, you know, that it's sort of current energy use, not embedded. I mean, it doesn't mean it's not important, but it's, you know, the reality is people are looking at the bank account on a monthly basis and they want to know that they've got enough to pay for their rent. So
yeah, I think just on Richard's point, sorry to cut you off, Matt, what some of the things that came through on the office to resi conversions were volume. So the fact that because they had slightly higher ceilings in office to resi conversions, they had slightly larger apartments, which can be a bit of a pain when you're looking at sort of our ROI, but it does have an impact. Also, the character of the buildings definitely came through. That comes through at the keel as well. So there are other reasons why those buildings are so highly rated. Last question, and we have only got 5 minutes, panel. So if you do have anything you really achingly want to say, please let me know. But I think I'm going to send this to you, Matt. Does a building's links to its local community matter? If so, to who, and what does good practice look like?
Great question. Yes, it does matter. It's critical, if anything. I think people, the customers within our buildings want to feel like they're living in something that's unique. And if you're going to provide a unique experience, then independent retailers are an amazing sort of way to do that with partnerships. So Fox, one of our builders, they've been fantastic at this. They'll have farmers markets, local, artisan sort of trades coming in. If we've got a glut of people moving in, they'll have a local plant, sales team will arrive and sell them all plants when they've just moved in. It's a symbiotic relationship. If you can support these type of retailers, then you are effectively becoming an important part of the community because you're helping to sustain it. And I think that's probably where good practice starts from. So, yeah.
I mean, John and I are probably going to be absolutely aligned on that. When you're going through the planning process, one of the things that we often come across is that, there is this misconception that we're going to be building a building and it's going to be an island inside the community of these very wealthy people living in, in these yuppie houses. And what they don't realise is that all the operators who've got any kind of credence are integrating themselves into the community as deeply as possible, because they do want to support the artisan and the local retailers. They do want to support the communities, so they're embedding themselves in activities and events and inviting people in. I mean, it just makes a build to rent project and a facility much better if it lands within a community in a positive way.
Ian, I absolutely support that, and I'd even go further to say that the scale of projects that we're all working on and the amount of impact they may have on some of the communities that we put in these, they can become the hub, they can become the community centre if there's the appetite to ensure that aspect of it is there from the start. And I think a lot of, when you're building a new building in particular, I know Richard's question about conversion, I think that's a really great point, but on the new build, we're all looking for authenticity. We're all looking to make it of character of the place. We want it to reach way beyond its red line, and the scale of these projects that we're all doing have the possibility to be that hub within that community. And I think just by opening the doors and being open to that as a concept, it really can change what can be delivered inside the buildings, particularly at the ground and first floors, that can benefit more than just the residents in the building, because that's what the residents want as well.
I mean, they're also also part of what is a major regeneration.
Yeah,
they're often being placed in places within cities that have historically moved on from their previous use of warehousing or retailing or whatever it is, and what they are is catalyzing the future of that particular location. So it has to be the hub in the community. It has to be a part of it, because it quite likely will be the part of it that regenerates that community going forward.
I couldn't agree more, and I'm conscious that we've got 1 minute left. I think
I'm looking forward to your 15 minutes of wrap up, Rory.
Yeah, no, I know. Well, listen, thank you so much, John, Ian and Matt, for joining us today. I hope we got through everyone's questions. If you did have a burning question you haven't been able to ask, please send it to us. We'll do our best to get back to you. Keep an eye out for your inbox for the recording of this session. And thank you all for joining. And if you are interested in hearing more about how you can use HomeViews Pro, we'll be in touch without to book a time in to have a chat. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you for joining, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.